If you've ever wanted to start a podcast but didn't know where to begin, this episode is your blueprint. It's a behind-the-scenes look at what it really takes to launch, grow, and sustain a show that connects with people. I'm John Quick, host of Stories Worth Hearing, where we explore the journeys of creators, entrepreneurs, and difference makers who have powerful stories to share. Today, I'm joined by Manny, the creator and host of The State I Am In, a podcast where every conversation points north. His show dives deep into the stories, people, and ideas shaping life in Alaska, with a voice that feels both uniquely local and universally human. Manny is only 12 episodes in, but that's what makes this conversation special. He's right in the middle of it, building his show, finding his rhythm, and learning the lessons that every creator faces in those early days. In our conversation, he opens up about how he got started, what he's learned so far, and the challenges that come with finding your voice in a crowded world. We talk about the creative process, favorite guests, and the drive that keeps him showing up when most podcasts fade. And we look ahead at his hopes, his vision, and what he wants the state I am in to become for Alaska and beyond. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, business, or creative project, this is one you're going to want to listen to from start to finish.
Well, Manny, thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you and kind of hear how you started a podcast. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
This will be fun. So I think for our listeners, they'll get a sneak peek kind of behind the curtains of what does it look like to start a podcast. I think there's lots of folks out there that want to start a podcast or maybe start a podcast and did a couple episodes and realized it was really tough. So for folks listening in, you're going to want to listen to the full 30 minutes to get a real peek behind the curtain on what it takes. So first, my first question to you is this, Manny. What inspired you to start The State I'm In? Was there a specific moment or conversation or story that made you realize you wanted to share stories through a podcast?
Yeah, well, I've been a consumer of podcasts for probably about a decade now. And so think about a kid wanting to be a rock star. He probably saw a crazy concert one time or some album that was amazing and made him think maybe I want to pick up a guitar. And that's basically what it was for me for the last decade or so, just listening to a variety of shows from, I think the first thing I ever listened to was Dave Ramsey's branch off of radio into the podcast world. And then Ali Ward, Ologies with Ali Ward, Joe Rogan, of course, Andrew Huberman, just a variety of different shows and personalities. And the long form thing really got a hold of me about last year around election time. Because I'm, listening to Bernie Sanders for 2 hours. I'm listening to RFK Jr. for 2 hours, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, these people that are all over national headlines and people know the ins and outs of their lives. And I was like, whether or not I believed, or I guess not believed them, but agreed with their ideologies or their politics or their philosophies, to sit down with someone for at least an hour or 2 hours, you get a better insight of who these people are. And I would honestly say for every single one of those people I just mentioned, regardless of what I went into, my opinions about those people, my perspective of them changed after listening to those shows. And so I thought, why can't we take that form and just bring it to Alaska? We have great people in this state. We have politicians in this state. We have amazing business owners. And I was like, it would be really cool to kind of take that format and just sit across the table with someone in our state of Alaska, less than 1 million people. But I think others would find value in it too. And so I just went for it.
That's awesome. So what's the meaning behind the name? The State I Am is such a unique title. What does it represent for you personally? And how does it reflect the kind of stories or themes that you want to explore in your podcast?
Yeah, so the state I'm in, it first and foremost, I live in Alaska. So it's all encompassing of the things, the issues, the people, the culture, the history that is Alaska. So the state I'm in physically is Alaska. And then the other thing is just, for me personally, I'm kind of a deep thinker and I go through, different phases of life as a father, as a husband, as someone who has different pursuits outside of the podcast world, things I'm working on my health or my education. And so I kind of always go through these different stages. And so I wanted to introduce that into the show as well. And, it kind of formed this mantra of keep north, which is the, I guess the thesis or the, value system of the podcast. And And that's just that I would, look to keep North or, keep Alaska by looking at preserving the things that we care about, the way of life, its culture, its resources, that everything in the show would be kind of geared towards that. We have a specific way of doing things here, hunting and gathering, and we have fishing, and it's a part of life. And the other part is keeping North as far as direction, where we're headed, who's leading us, and what are the issues that we're concerned about, that my neighbors are concerned about, that I'm concerned about, for my kids and their future. And then the last thing is just kind of the faith aspect of keeping North, by just kind of looking heavenward and being like, how does this all relate to my own faith? And the other thing is, I had no intention of this, but more and more, you sit down with someone and talk for a couple hours, you're going to start getting into like the deeper questions of God and, how the world works and, the deeper issues. And so all of that was kind of wrapped up in this phrase of the state I'm in. And I just thought it was so fitting, and I absolutely love it.
That's awesome. So starting a podcast can feel overwhelming. I can just speak from experience. So how did you actually begin, choosing equipment, making your studio? You have an in-person experience. Talk to me about what some of that looked like, because it's one thing to start a podcast that's remote, which is what most people do. It's another thing to start a podcast where you're asking folks to come and sit down with you for a couple hours. So walk me through kind of what that looked like for you.
Yeah, it was really important to actually try to sit down with someone in person. And so right off the bat, I knew that, I wanted to have, of course, amazing audio, or the best I could get for it at the time. And then I wanted video as well. And so, thank God for YouTube. I guarantee there's many people that are like, how do I improve, in this or that, whether it's, farming or, how to make something. You go to YouTube, and thank God for that resource. And I was right along with them, YouTube University, and there's so many people, great people out there sharing information on types of equipment you should use based on what you're going to do. And so I knew I wanted to do an in-person, video podcast. And so I just started YouTubing it. I think PSS Media was probably the biggest one that stood out to me to really kind of walk me through the steps of how to start a podcast. And the hardest part, honestly, John, was just saying, I'm going to do this and starting.
Well, what goes through your brain or process to kind of pick the type of guests that you want to be on the show? Maybe, what kind of process did you go through for the first, 12 that have been on the show, and has your process tweaked along the way?
Yeah, I think one thing I've always kind of realized is that everybody has a story, but not everybody is advertising that story. And I guess maybe not everyone wants to advertise their story, and that's completely fine. Not everyone is going to be putting out an album or a book or a podcast or, putting themselves out on social media. And that's totally fine. But what I noticed was that there are those people out there that have decided to take steps forward in something that is important to them. So that's the first step that I took, was just looking at people in my community, people in my state that had something that they were passionate about, and they took steps towards sharing that with others. And so there was, people just in my local vicinity that, took small steps. They weren't publishing books or anything like that, but, maybe they were on a radio show. Maybe they were doing a lecture series. Those are the people that I reached out to first, because one, those are the issues and the topics that are closest to me in my community. But then it's a local resource of someone that's easily accessible, that it already wants to get something they're passionate about out there. And that was the easiest place to go. So I think of the business owners that are, killing it, that are doing amazing things. The business owners in the community are huge, because in every community, those are the people that had a good idea and they took a step forward in a big kind of way. And then from there, honestly, John, it's like from one story to the next, people are like, who has a really cool story is this person, or who you should talk to is this person. Because especially in a small, Alaska has a very small town feel to it. You learn very quickly that you're like two people away from talking to someone, and it's pretty cool. I started just where it was at, and it's just kind of grown from there.
Was it tough to get those first couple guests? Because it gets easier as you go along the way. It's just from my experience, but those first couple guests, what was that like? I mean, hey, do you want to come on my new podcast? Talk to me a little bit about that. Because I think sometimes that's daunting for a lot of folks. They can get the Riverside and they can buy a mic and they can do those things. But, oh crap, now I got to convince this person to come on my show. What was it like those first couple guests?
Yeah, I think part of it, there was a few people where I had already established some trust. And so I think they knew that my heart behind it wasn't to, zing them with some crazy
Mm.
questions or I had a specific angle in mind. It was just, hey, I think what you're doing is really cool. And I think other people would appreciate hearing your story or hearing what you're doing. There were some cold calls, definitely. People had no idea who I was, and that was a little bit more intimidating. But I think, if someone at least stayed around for the conversation, and didn't just hang up the phone and hear the heart behind it, is that you're really just trying to share a story. And I think that people like that. And at least what I've learned is that people like hearing the stories on the other end of it too. And so I would say fear was definitely a big part of it going into it. But the more I just got comfortable in asking, the more I realized people are open to this. And even if they say no, it's not because they don't believe in what I'm doing. A lot of times public speaking isn't comfortable for a lot of people. So, that's part of it. But I would say it's been pretty positive. I've been surprised because I thought for sure, like to be at, just a dozen episodes, I think a success for me is anytime someone says yes. And so far I've got a lot of yeses and I'm, just thankful for everyone that has agreed to it to this point.
That's awesome. So take me a little bit behind the scenes of like your creative process of how do you prepare for an interview? Do you have a pre-interview with the folks? Is there a conversation beforehand? Are you sending over show notes? Is there post-production that goes into it after, the episode's recorded and you got to do edits? Take us a little bit, kind of peek behind the curtains of what your process is like from A to Z. You don't have to spill all the secret sauce, but just for folks out there, it's a lot more work than just showing up and looking at a camera.
Totally. I mean, I really appreciate shows and books, movies, anything where a lot of research is done prior. So there are a lot of people that do share their lives on social media and do have like, they'll create a page for something they're passionate about or for their business or for their movement or what, social issues that they're working on. And it helps me knowing what the goal is of my show and to reflect that with what someone else is doing online that's accessible. I can kind of do my research ahead of time to see like get a feel for this person. What are they, passionate about? What is, their goal and what they're doing? And then I look internally to, this show. I'm like, okay, how can we, how can we develop that more? And that really helps a lot, especially, with authors. I love to read books, before I've had a couple authors on the show just that live in Alaska and in their experiences. And it's great to read those stories to just have a firm foundation on who this person is, what their story is, because that just adds so much to the conversation. And so when you finally meet them and you sit down at the table, you're kind of picking up the conversation just from what you've learned through their writing. And you can kind of do the same through social media. I do a guest form, just kind of a basic guest form. It started off really bare bones. It's kind of gotten like way too detailed now, and I think I'm going to back off a little bit. But the guest form does help just to kind of talk about some minor things with what their time availability is like. Maybe someone doesn't want to sit down and talk to me for over an hour or 2 hours. It kind of helps weed out some of those aspects, but it does definitely give me a little bit of a head start in planning the episode as it gets closer.
That's awesome. So take me back to maybe one of your favorite moments with a guest so far or a moment where you thought, man, I'm actually doing this and it's making a difference. This is pretty cool.
Well, I joke that every new guest is my favorite guest.
Nice.
It's kind of the way it goes. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think it's because just starting out, I'm not talking to, the same type of person. We all have different personalities. We all have different pursuits. And I intentionally have had a variety of people on my show, from geologists to doctors to authors to just, policemen and business owners. And so everyone kind of has their own thing that they bring to the table. And so every time I get a chance to sit down with someone new, it's like it's a whole new experience. And I think that comes through on the other side for the listener as well, because you're not going to hear the same thing, week to week. And I really like that aspect of it. But I will say that my most recent guest, he's an Army veteran. He parachuted into Iraq in 2003 when that war was just kicking off, and He's authored a couple books, and he just has an amazing story that is very human, very relatable, not a cookie cutter house with the white picket fence story. It's kind of rough, but it's really raw. But I think what's so cool about that, and what's so cool about all people that share their stories, is that let me put it this way. I like to picture humanity just kind of holding hands in a giant circle, but we have these dividers on either side of us. And when you get the opportunity to hear a real story, someone that's sharing their struggle, sharing their highs and lows, I feel like those dividers just kind of come down and we see each other and we say, you went through that too. You felt grief. You felt this kind of pain. You felt this kind of trauma, or you felt this kind of success. And there's like a connection that happens when you see that. So I think with Robert Stark, my guest that I previously had, putting his story out there, it was really like, man, this is the humanity that we need. I think this is the kind of stuff that really connects people to one another. And I think that's definitely the thing that makes me say, like, I'm going to keep doing this, because if I can keep putting stories out there to where people can just connect with like the heart of stuff versus just the comment section online, I think some good can definitely come of it.
That's awesome. So it's one thing to have a great looking studio, getting good guests, having a good experience, with a guest 1 or 2 hours. It's sometimes a whole nother thing to then go figure out a way to then market that podcast. Talk to me a little bit about what your marketing hat looks like, what you've done, some of the things that's maybe worked or hasn't worked for folks wondering, man, I have this idea for a podcast. I'd love to get it out, but I don't have any idea how to market it. I mean, my mom will listen to it. I know that, but I don't know anybody else besides that. So talk to me a little bit about what your process is like on the marketing side.
Yeah, so this isn't my full-time job. I have other stuff that I do, and I have a family and I have a full-time job. This is a total creative outlet for me that I feel like is doing some kind of good in the world. So to talk about like marketing it is like just something that I'm basically just doing, starting where I'm at. And that's, like I said, word of mouth is huge. Using the free resources that you have available through social media and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and things like that can grow fairly quickly. One thing I have started doing though is looking into advertising through those platforms, because I've learned that their targeting is way better than mine will ever be. And they know exactly who will link up with your show, think it's interesting. And so I'm starting to explore that a little bit more. I have a certain amount of capital that I want to put into that each month. And so, but it's not big on my radar right now, especially just starting off. When I started this, I read a book by John Acuff called Start. And he used to be a part of I think the Dave Ramsey team at one point. He's kind of like a business entrepreneur type. And one of the things he said and emphasized in that book that has always stuck with me is that you should focus more on practicing than promoting. And I think that's exactly where I'm at right now, is that, you know, this conversation with you, this is practice for me, being a dozen episodes into it. And, every episode that I do, this is all practice. I'm learning something every time. So, I hope at episode 100, you're going to get a much better quality show than at episode 12. And that's kind of my mindset going into it, is that everything that I do is building the brand and building the identity that I want for this show. So I don't think I'm really emphasizing the marketing part of it yet, but it'll definitely come.
Nice. So most podcasts don't make it to episode number 10. You made it to 12. What keeps you going? I mean, you're a husband, you're a father, you got other things you're doing on the side. A podcast is not a small task to tackle. What keeps you motivated to keep going?
Yeah, I think every listener is a motivator. Whether 5 people listen to it or 100 people listen to it. I think just knowing that this work could be resonating with someone else is definitely a motivator. The other part of it is that there's not a whole lot of I don't feel a lot of pressure with it. Like I said, this is definitely like a creative outlet for me. It's something that I'm doing kind of as a hobby that I would really like to develop more, but the pressure isn't there. The pressure isn't like, I need this amount of views this month, or I need this, kind of income. I need this show to generate some income this month. That pressure isn't there. This is like purely just creating. And I think that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me coming back to the camera, keeps me coming back to researching, potential guests and stuff like that.
That's awesome. So let's say a new listener listens in. What do you hope that they walk away with? Is it inspiration? Is it maybe a different outlook on life? What's a win for you for a new listener?
I would say a win for me would be for someone to approach the approach the conversation with an open mind, or maybe, they're planted in their opinion on in one way or the other based on the guests that I'm having. Not that I have a whole lot of controversial topics on this show, but you know, as you talk with people, you figure out that you may not see eye to eye. And I think the value of a long format podcast is you're able to have a conversation with someone and your opinion might not be totally changed, but at least you'll start to ask some questions or maybe you'll learn something. And I think the important part with that is for the host is to kind of facilitate that to where it's not a hostile environment. It's not, an environment to where I am letting you know I'm definitely not going to be swayed in my opinions or my beliefs, but that I'm open and I'm at the table to have a conversation in a civilized manner, in a way that's respectful of one another. And so I hope every person that listens senses that and comes away with inspiration for sure, because there's plenty of inspirational stories in the state that, maybe they learn something about themselves, or maybe, allow themselves to consider an opposing opinion and find some common ground.
So when you look to the future, maybe a year or two from now, what are some of your biggest hopes and dreams for the podcast specifically? You're looking back 2 years from now. What do you think you could look back on and say, man, I'm really killing it? What are some of those hopes and dreams?
Yeah, so many. I think one of the things is, at just a smaller technical stage, is just to be more comfortable in the process of networking with guests and with editing and with the video production, and maybe I want to have another camera, for a different camera angle, or those kind of just technical aspects. I think the way it looks is very important to me, and because I also I talk about long format stuff, but I do that because I definitely want those sound bites and those video clips to be shared, because I think that's how you get people to engage with your content is to hear 30 seconds to a minute of something and be like, oh, that sounds like an interesting conversation. I might want to listen to that full episode. So there's that aspect of just getting more comfortable with the technical part, and then the other part is just growing the network. I would like to see higher profile people in the state sit down across the table from me. I think immediately what comes to my mind is politicians, our governor, some of our senators and congressmen, but not so much to even discuss politics, but maybe just to sit down and get a feel for who they are as people and where do they like to go to eat, when they're on the peninsula, what's their, most recent book that they've read, this could be current or former. And I think there's a lot of value in that, especially in a small state. Like I said, where you're only 2 or 3 people away from those coming into contact with those people. So I think about that, maybe some higher profile Alaskan politicians, but, business owners, the oil and gas industry, people from, the fishing industry and the commercial fishing, and, a lot of the issues and the big players surrounding those issues. Honestly, I'd be proud to still be doing this in 2 years and to have, a couple hundred episodes under my belt. And just to say that I'm still going for it would be a win for me.
That's awesome. So tell folks where they can find the podcast, all the things. We'll put all the details in the description, but for folks listening in, where can they find your podcast?
Yeah, so you can find The State I Am In on all podcast platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. And then on social media, you can find me at the State I Am In podcast. And that's on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And then YouTube is kind of kicking off, a little bit smaller following there, but that is also at the State I Am In. Of course, if you're interested in being a guest or want to reach out to me directly, my email is manny at, you guessed it, thestateI'min.com.
Well, folks listening in, I want to encourage you. I'm going to put all the links into the description. Go check out the podcast. And you just got kind of a masterclass on what it looks like to start a podcast from scratch and be 12 episodes in a in-person studio long format podcast. So, man, I want to thank you so much for joining us here. We wish you nothing but success, and you're welcome back anytime. Hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
I appreciate it, John. Thank you so much.